The shotgun blast echoed across the plains, splitting the silence of the Montana Territory like thunder as Jedediah Prescott watched the would-be horse thief collapse into the dust. June 1873 was turning out to be as merciless as the winter that had preceded it, and Jedediah had long ago stopped counting the men who tried to take what was his. "Come on, Scout," he muttered to the lean, tan-colored mutt at his side. The dog's ears perked up, his dark eyes watchful as they always were. "Let's head back before more trouble finds us." Jedediah didn't look back at the body. The law was sparse in these parts, and a man protected what was his or lost it. He'd been losing things his whole life: his parents to cholera when he was 12, his brother to the war, his wife Emma to childbirth 3 years ago. All he had left now was his small ranch, his horses, and Scout, who had been Emma's dog before becoming his only companion. Trust was a luxury Jedediah couldn't afford. Not with other ranchers eyeing his water rights, not with thieves watching his modest herd, and certainly not with the townspeople of Silverwater Creek, who whispered about the cold-eyed widower when he rode in for supplies. As he mounted his chestnut stallion, the setting sun cast long shadows across the grassy hills. Scout trotted alongside as they made their way back to the ranch, a small collection of buildings that Jedediah had built with his own hands: a modest cabin, a barn, and a corral for the horses he bred and trained. 3 days later, necessity drove Jedediah to town. His coffee and flour had run low, and no matter how much he preferred the solitude of his ranch, certain supplies couldn't be hunted or grown. He rode down Silverwater Creek's main street with Scout following loyally, the dog's nails clicking against the wooden boardwalks. "Stay," he commanded Scout outside the general store, and the dog obediently sat, watching the street with the same wariness that characterized his master. Inside, Jedediah nodded curtly to Mr. Finch, the storekeeper, and silently handed over his list. He'd learned to keep his words few and his interactions fewer. People asked fewer questions that way, expected less, and most importantly, left him alone. "Heard there was some trouble out by your place," Finch commented, gathering the items. "Sheriff found a body." Jedediah met the man's curious gaze evenly. "Man tried to steal my horses." Finch swallowed and nodded, quickening his pace as he filled the order. The silence that followed was heavy, but Jedediah was accustomed to the weight of unspoken judgment. As he waited, the bell above the door chimed. He didn't turn, disinterested in whoever had entered, until a soft, unfamiliar voice spoke behind him. "Excuse me, is this your dog outside?" Jedediah turned slowly. A young woman stood in the doorway, her auburn hair neatly pinned beneath a simple hat, her blue dress modest but well kept. Her eyes were kind but direct. "He is," Jedediah answered flatly. She nodded. "He looks hungry. I hope you don't mind, but I gave him some of my jerky. He was very polite about taking it." A small smile curved her lips. For a moment, Jedediah was speechless. Scout didn't take food from strangers. The dog was as distrustful as he was. "I'm Nora Reynolds," she continued, seemingly unperturbed by his silence. "I've just arrived to take over teaching at the school." Jedediah found his voice. "Jedediah Prescott." Then, belatedly and gruffly, "Thank you for feeding him." Nora's smile widened slightly. "You're welcome, Mr. Prescott. He has very good manners for a ranch dog." Before Jedediah could respond, Finch interrupted. "Miss Reynolds, your order is ready in the back, and I've set aside those books you inquired about." With a nod to Jedediah, she moved past him to the counter. He paid for his goods quickly and left, unsettled by the encounter. Outside, Scout looked up at him with what Jedediah could have sworn was satisfaction. "Traitor," he muttered to the dog, but there was no heat in it. Scout had never accepted food from anyone other than Jedediah since Emma died. Not even from the ranch hand Jedediah occasionally hired during calving season. As they rode home, Jedediah found himself thinking about Nora Reynolds. The schoolteacher had been expected for weeks. The town had been without one since old Mrs. Peterson passed in the winter. But Jedediah had expected someone older, more severe. Not someone with eyes the color of the summer sky and a smile that seemed to reach something long dormant inside him. He shook the thought away. He had no business thinking about the new schoolteacher. His life was set in its ways and he preferred it that way. Simple, solitary, safe. The next time Jedediah went to town, 2 weeks later, he told himself it was purely for supplies. If Scout seemed unusually eager to accompany him, he ignored it. The dog had always enjoyed the trip before. They arrived earlier in the day this time, the main street bustling with more activity than Jedediah preferred. He tied his horse to the hitching post and instructed Scout to stay, his eyes automatically scanning the street out of habit. That's when he saw her again. Nora Reynolds was exiting the small building that served as Silverwater Creek schoolhouse, books cradled in her arms. Even from a distance, he could see the animation in her face as she spoke to one of the mothers picking up a child. Scout whined, his tail wagging slightly. "No," Jedediah said firmly to the dog. "We're here for supplies." But Scout had spotted her too, and, in a display of disobedience that left Jedediah stunned, the dog trotted across the street directly toward Nora. "Scout," he called sharply, but the dog ignored him completely. Jedediah watched in disbelief as Nora turned at Scout's approach, her face lighting up in recognition. She set her books down on the schoolhouse steps and knelt, allowing the dog to approach. Scout, who normally circled strangers warily, went right to her, accepting a scratch behind the ears. With a muttered curse, Jedediah crossed the street. "I apologize, Miss Reynolds. He's not usually so. Forward." She looked up, that same direct gaze meeting his. "No apology needed, Mr. Prescott. Scout and I are already friends." She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "Are you in town for supplies?" "Yes," he answered, feeling oddly wrong-footed by her easy manner. Most people in town maintained a careful distance from him, a combination of respect and wariness. Nora Reynolds seemed to have neither. "I was just heading to the general store myself," she said. "Would you mind if I walked with you? These books are heavier than they look." Before he could formulate a response, she had gathered her books and was falling into step beside him, Scout happily trotting at her other side. Jedediah found himself automatically adjusting his long stride to match her shorter one. "How are you finding Silverwater Creek?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. He rarely initiated conversation. "It's a lovely little town," she replied. "The children are eager to learn and everyone has been very welcoming." She glanced at him. "Though I gather you don't spend much time here." "I have a ranch to run," he said, more curtly than he intended. She nodded, unbothered by his tone. "Of course. Several of my students are from ranching families. They tell me the most interesting stories about life on the range." A pause. "None of them quite as colorful as what I've heard about Jedediah Prescott, though." He tensed. "And what have you heard, Miss Reynolds?" Her steps didn't falter. "That you're the finest horse trainer in the territory, that you keep to yourself, that you've had more than your share of hardship." Her voice softened. "And that you lost your wife some years ago." The direct mention of Emma caught him off guard. Most people avoided the subject entirely. 3 years, he said shortly. They reached the general store in silence, and he held the door for her. As she passed, she looked up at him with something like understanding in her eyes. "Time doesn't heal all wounds, Mr. Prescott, but it does teach us to carry them differently." Inside the store, Nora spoke easily with Finch, inquiring about ordered school supplies and exchanging pleasantries. Jedediah hung back, watching her. There was a natural grace to her movements, a confidence that belied her youth. He guessed she was in her mid-20s, several years younger than his 32. When she finished her business, she turned to him. "It was nice seeing you again, Mr. Prescott. And Scout, of course." She bent slightly to address the dog. "You take care of him, you hear." With that, she was gone, leaving Jedediah with the distinct feeling that something had shifted in his carefully ordered world. Over the next month, Jedediah found reasons to visit town more frequently than usual. Sometimes he claimed to need supplies. Other times, he told himself he was checking on rumors of horse thieves in the area. But each time, Scout would somehow manage to find Nora Reynolds, and Jedediah would find himself engaging in increasingly lengthy conversations with the schoolteacher. He learned that she was 26, originally from Boston, and had come west after losing her parents to influence. She spoke of her love of teaching and her belief that education was the future of the West. She asked thoughtful questions about his horses and listened intently to his answers. One Saturday afternoon in late July, Jedediah arrived in town to find a community gathering in progress, some kind of fundraiser for new school books. Tables had been set up in the small town square, laden with baked goods and crafts for sale. He was about to turn and leave when Scout darted into the crowd, heading unerringly toward where Nora stood behind a table of pies and cakes. With a resigned sigh, Jedediah followed. "Mr. Prescott." Nora's face brightened when she saw him. "I didn't expect to see you today." "Just passing through," he said, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through him at her smile. She looked down at Scout, who sat expectantly at her feet. "And I suppose you had nothing to do with bringing him here," she teased the dog. To Jedediah's surprise, several townspeople nodded to him as they passed, their usual wariness tempered by something like curiosity. He realized suddenly how it must look the reclusive widower repeatedly seeking out the company of the pretty schoolteacher. "Your dog has excellent taste," said Mrs. Hanson, the baker's wife, as she approached. Miss Reynolds's apple pie sold out in minutes. She gave Jedediah a knowing look before moving on. Nora laughed, a light sound that made something tighten in Jedediah's chest. "I saved one," she admitted, reaching under the table and producing a small pie. "For Scout, of course." "Of course," Jedediah echoed, unable to stop the slight upward tilt of his mouth. "Perhaps you could join me for lunch," she suggested, gesturing to a quiet spot under a nearby oak tree where a blanket had been spread. "The children are performing a recitation in an hour, but I have time before then." He should refuse. He knew he should. But Scout was already heading for the blanket, and Jedediah found himself following once again. They sat in the dappled shade, sharing the pie and a meal of fried chicken and biscuits that Nora had packed. Around them, the town's celebration continued, but in their small circle of shade it felt almost private. "Why did you really come to Silverwater Creek?" Jedediah asked suddenly. "An educated woman from Boston could find better opportunities than teaching in a frontier town." Nora considered him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "After my parents died, I felt confined by Boston society. The sympathetic looks, the whispers, the expectations." She smoothed her skirt. "Out here, no one knows what I was before. I can simply be who I am now." The words resonated with him more than he cared to admit. Wasn't that what he'd sought in his isolation? A place where Emma's ghost didn't linger in every pitying glance. "Besides," she continued with a small smile, "I believe in what I'm doing. These children deserve a future beyond what their parents had, and education is the key to that future." "You're an idealist," he said, but there was no judgment in his tone. "And you're a realist," she countered. "Perhaps we balance each other." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Jedediah looked away, focusing on Scout, who had stretched out contentedly in the sun after finishing his share of the pie. "Your wife," Nora said gently. "What was she like?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him about Emma in years. She was. He struggled for words. Kind, determined. "She loved music, though neither of us could play worth a damn. She's the one who found Scout as a puppy, half-starved and abandoned." Nora listened, her eyes soft but not pitying. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Jedediah agreed. Then, surprising himself, "She would have liked you." The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Then the church bell rang, signaling the start of the children's performance. "I should go," Nora said, rising. "Thank you for sharing lunch with me. And for telling me about Emma." As she walked away, Scout looked up at Jedediah with what seemed like disapproval. "Don't start," he told the dog. "We're heading home." But as he rode back to his ranch, Emma's name on his lips for the first time in years, Jedediah realized something had changed. The memories didn't cut quite as deep as they once had. The next week brought scorching heat to the territory, the kind that made the air shimmer over the distant mountains and turned the creek beds to dusty ribbons. Jedediah was checking his eastern fence line when he saw the smoke, a thick, black column rising from the direction of town. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse toward Silverwater Creek, Scout racing alongside. As he crested the final hill, he saw the schoolhouse engulfed in flames. A crowd gathered around it. His heart hammered in his chest as he scanned the faces, looking for Nora. He dismounted before his horse fully stopped, pushing through the crowd. "Where is she?" he demanded of the first person he reached. Harold Wheeler, the blacksmith. "Miss Reynolds." Wheeler pointed to a figure sitting on a bench outside the doctor's office across the street. "She's shaken up, but Doc says she'll be fine. Got most of the children out before the roof started to go." Jedediah moved quickly to her side. Nora's face was smudged with soot, her dress singed at the hem. A bandage wrapped her right hand and she was coughing intermittently. But she was alive. Scout reached her first, whining and nosing at her knee. She looked up, her eyes widening at the sight of Jedediah. "You came," she said, her voice hoarse. "I saw the smoke." He sat beside her, fighting the urge to take her uninjured hand in his. "What happened?" "Lantern oil," she explained between coughs. "One of the younger boys was helping me prepare for tomorrow's lesson. He knocked over a lantern and it just spread so quickly." Her eyes filled with tears. "All the books, the supplies." "The children?" he asked quietly. "All safe," she assured him. "Billy Taylor has some burns on his arms, but the doctor says they'll heal." She looked toward the burning building, now beginning to collapse as the bucket brigade continued its futile efforts. "Everything we worked for, though." Jedediah followed her gaze. The schoolhouse had been one of the town's oldest buildings, built in the early days of settlement. Now it was nearly gone, the flames consuming decades of history. "It can be rebuilt," he said firmly. She looked at him, surprise evident in her reddened eyes. The town council was already struggling to pay for new books. A new building. She trailed off. "Then we'll find another way," he stated, the decision forming even as he spoke. "My barn is large enough to serve as a temporary schoolhouse until something more permanent can be arranged." Nora stared at him. "Your barn, but your ranch is 3 miles from town. I have a wagon. The older children can ride horses if they have them. For the rest, we can arrange transportation." He met her gaze steadily. "Those children need their education. You said so yourself." A slow smile spread across her face despite her exhaustion. Jedediah Prescott, offering up his sanctuary for a classroom of noisy children. The town won't believe it. "Let them think what they want," he said gruffly. "I'm doing this for you, not them." The words hung between them, more revealing than he'd intended. But Nora didn't look away. Instead, she reached out with her bandaged hand and lightly touched his arm. "Thank you," she said simply. 2 days later, Jedediah found himself helping to clear space in his barn, moving hay bales to create makeshift benches, and constructing a rough table that would serve as Nora's desk. Scout supervised the proceedings with apparent approval, occasionally bringing tools that had been set down and forgotten. The town had rallied around the idea with surprising enthusiasm. Some, like Wheeler the blacksmith, had expressed shock at Jedediah's offer, but no one had questioned it directly. The prevailing theory, overheard by Jedediah during a trip to the general store, was that Prescott's finally remembering what it means to be part of a community. He wasn't sure that was true. What he did know was that the thought of Nora Reynolds giving up on her dream and returning east was more painful than the idea of sharing his hard-won solitude. The following Monday, Jedediah stood on his porch and watched as a procession approached his ranch, Nora leading the way in the town's communal wagon, filled with younger children, followed by older students on horseback or on foot. Scout bounded down to meet them, receiving pats and exclamations of delight from the children. Nora's face, when she looked up at him, held a mixture of gratitude and something deeper that made Jedediah's chest tighten. "Welcome to Prescott Ranch School," he said dryly as she approached. Her laugh was worth every moment of peace he was sacrificing. "It has a nice ring to it," she replied. The days that followed established a new rhythm to Jedediah's life. He would rise early, tend to essential ranch work, and then retreat to the house or the corral when the children arrived. Sometimes, during their lunch break, he would demonstrate horse training techniques for the older boys who showed interest. Occasionally, he would overhear Nora's lessons: history, mathematics, literature delivered in her clear, enthusiastic voice. In the evenings, after the children had gone, Nora often stayed to prepare for the next day's lessons. These quiet hours became precious to Jedediah. They would share a simple dinner, and then he would listen as she talked about her students' progress or discuss books she thought he might enjoy. One evening in early August, as they sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson, Nora turned to him with a serious expression. "The town council met yesterday," she said. "They've decided to rebuild the schoolhouse on the original site. Construction will begin next week." Jedediah nodded, ignoring the hollow feeling that settled in his stomach. "That's good news." "Yes," she agreed, though her tone lacked conviction. "By October, everything should be back to normal." Normal. The word echoed in Jedediah's mind. Normal meant Nora teaching in town, not bringing life and laughter to his ranch each day. Normal meant returning to his solitude, to the quiet existence he'd built after Emma's death. He realized with a clarity that was almost painful that he no longer wanted normal. "Will you miss it?" he asked. "Teaching here." She was silent for a long moment, her gaze on the sunset. "Yes," she finally said. "More than I expected to." Scout, who had been lying between them, shifted to rest his head on Nora's lap. She stroked his ears absently. "He's grown quite attached to you," Jedediah observed. "The feeling is mutual." She smiled down at the dog. "He's a good judge of character." "Better than his owner," Jedediah admitted. "I didn't make it easy for you to get to know me." Nora's smile widened slightly. "No, you didn't. But then, the most worthwhile things rarely come easily." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a boundary crossed, a possibility acknowledged. "Nora," he began, her name still feeling new on his tongue. "When the schoolhouse is finished." She waited, her expression open and expectant. "I'd like to continue seeing you," he finished, the words inadequate for the depth of what he felt. Not just in passing in town, but properly. Properly, she repeated, her eyes dancing with humor and warmth. Jedediah Prescott, are you asking to court me? He cleared his throat, suddenly feeling like an awkward youth rather than a grown man. Yes, if you're amenable, she echoed, laughing softly. Such a formal way to ask. Jedediah frowned slightly. If you prefer not to, no, she interrupted, placing her hand on his arm. I am very much amenable. In fact, I've been hoping you might ask. Relief and joy surged through him, unfamiliar but welcome emotions. You have. From the moment Scout accepted food from my hand, I suspected there might be hope for his master as well, she teased. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the porch, Jedediah tentatively covered her hand with his own. Her fingers were small but strong, marked with calluses from writing and the recent burn that was still healing. I'm not an easy man, he warned her. I've been alone a long time, and I'm not an easy woman, she countered. I have opinions and ambitions that many find unsuitable for a lady. I don't want suitable, he said honestly. I want you. In the gathering twilight, Nora's face softened. She leaned toward him slightly, a clear invitation. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Jedediah bent his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening as Nora responded with unexpected passion. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing quickly, and even Scout seemed to be watching them with approval. I've wanted to do that since you fed my dog, Jedediah admitted, his voice rough. Nora laughed, the sound bright in the evening air. If I'd known that was all it would take, I might have tried it sooner. As September gave way to October, the new schoolhouse took shape in town. Jedediah found himself involved in its construction, offering lumber from his land and labor alongside men he'd barely spoken to in years. The work was good, honest, and somehow healing, building something new instead of simply maintaining what was left of his old life. His courtship with Nora progressed under the watchful eyes of the town. They attended church together on Sundays, shared meals at the small hotel restaurant, and occasionally rode out to explore the surrounding countryside. Scout accompanied them everywhere. His earlier approval of Nora now extended to outright devotion. The day the schoolhouse was completed, the entire town gathered for a celebration. Jedediah stood slightly apart from the crowd, watching as Nora cut the ribbon across the new door, her face alight with joy. Children surged forward, eager to see their new classroom with its fresh paint and sturdy desks. She's done wonders for this town, said Sheriff Davis, coming to stand beside Jedediah. And for you, from what I can see. Jedediah nodded, not bothering to deny it. She has a gift for improving what she touches. The sheriff chuckled. Never thought I'd see the day when Jedediah Prescott would be sweet talking about a woman in public. I wouldn't call it sweet talking, Jedediah protested, though without heat. Call it what you want, Davis replied, clapping him on the shoulder. It's good to have you back among the living. As the crowd began to disperse, Nora made her way to him, her cheeks flushed with excitement. What do you think? Isn't it beautiful? It is, he agreed, though his eyes never left her face. You have plans this evening, she tilted her head slightly. Nothing that can't be changed. Why? I'd like to show you something at the ranch, he said. Something I've been working on, curiosity sparked in her eyes. Now you've got me intrigued. Let me just speak to Mrs. Peterson about tomorrow's supplies, and I'll be ready. The ride back to the ranch was filled with comfortable conversation. Nora spoke about her plans for the new classroom, and Jedediah found himself offering suggestions about shelving and storage that she enthusiastically embraced. Scout ran ahead of them, occasionally doubling back as if impatient for their arrival. As they approached the ranch, Jedediah felt a flutter of nerves. What he was about to show her represented more than just a construction project. It was a declaration of intent, a vision of a future he hadn't dared to imagine until Nora entered his life. He helped her dismount near the barn, then led her not toward the main house, but toward a stand of cottonwoods that bordered the property. "Close your eyes," he requested when they were nearly there. Nora raised an eyebrow but complied, allowing him to guide her forward with a hand at the small of her back. Scout danced around them, clearly aware of the significance of the moment. "All right," Jedediah said when they reached the clearing. "You can look now." Nora opened her eyes and her breath caught. Before them stood a small cabin, newly constructed, its pine logs golden in the late afternoon sun. A porch wrapped around the front, and windows gleamed on either side of a sturdy door. "Jedediah," she whispered, "what is this?" "A schoolhouse," he said. "A proper one right here on the ranch, for when the weather's too bad for the children to make it to town." He paused, gathering his courage. "And a home if you want it to be." She turned to him, her eyes wide. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" He nodded, suddenly unable to find the right words. From his pocket, he withdrew a small box and opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "Nora Reynolds," he managed finally. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you, Jedediah Prescott." He slipped the ring onto her finger, marveling at how perfectly it fit. Then he gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an uncharacteristic display of joy. Scout barked excitedly, circling them as Jedediah set Nora down and kissed her deeply. "You know," she said when they finally broke apart, "when I first came to Silverwater Creek, Mrs. Finch warned me about the reclusive, dangerous Jedediah Prescott." "Did she now?" he asked, amused. "She said you were cold as ice and twice as hard." Nora traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "But I knew better from the moment I saw you with Scout. A man who loves his dog that much can't be all bad." "So you decided to win him over first," Jedediah concluded. "It seemed like the sensible approach," she admitted with a laugh. "And it worked, didn't it?" Scout woofed in apparent agreement, tail wagging furiously. "It did," Jedediah agreed, pulling her close again. "Though I never stood a chance against the two of you." They were married that December in the new schoolhouse, with the entire town in attendance. Scout served as ring bearer, carrying the bands in a small pouch attached to his collar, his dignity only slightly compromised by the festive red bow Nora had insisted on. The following spring, as wildflowers carpeted the plains around their home, Jedediah watched as Nora taught a group of children under the cottonwood trees. Scout sprawled contentedly at her feet. In the evenings, she would read aloud while Jedediah worked on crafting furniture for their home or tended to ranch accounts. Life wasn't perfect. There were still hard days when the memories of what they'd both lost cast shadows. There were arguments and adjustments as two independent souls learned to share a life. But there was also laughter, passion, and a deep, abiding trust that grew stronger with each passing season. And when, a year later, Nora placed Jedediah's hand on her growing belly, the look of wonder on his face was matched only by Scout's apparent pride, as he appointed himself guardian of the mother-to-be. "Do you ever regret it?" Jedediah asked one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Coming to Silverwater Creek, marrying a difficult man with a complicated past, Nora leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Never," she said simply. "Some things are meant to be, even if the path to them isn't straight or easy." Scout, graying now around the muzzle but still alert, raised his head at the sound of her voice, then settled back against Jedediah's boot with a contented sigh. I never thought I'd trust anyone again, Jedediah admitted, his hand finding hers. After Emma, I was certain that part of me was dead. And now, she asked softly. He looked down at their intertwined fingers, at the gold band that matched the one he wore. Now I know better, he said. Thanks to a schoolteacher who knew the way to a man's heart was through his dog. Nora laughed, the sound blending with the evening breeze that rustled through the cottonwoods around their home. In that moment, with his wife in his arms and Scout at his feet, Jedediah Prescott knew he had found something he'd never expected to find again. Not just love, but a home in its truest sense. Trust, he had learned, wasn't a weakness after all. It was the foundation upon which everything of value was built: family, community, future. And while it didn't come easily to a man who had lost so much, it came all the same, one day at a time, one challenge met together, one promise kept. Just like the Montana Territory itself, wild, unpredictable but infinitely rich in possibilities, their life together stretched before them, full of hope and promise. And Jedediah Prescott, once the most solitary man in Silverwater Creek, wouldn't have it any other way.